Welcome to Tracks Through Time. I am your host and FreightWaves Deputy Editor, Brielle Jekyll, and I'm here to tell you some of the most interesting stories throughout history in transportation and freight, like always. And I am here with Mary O'Connell, a fellow FreightWaves TV host, as usual. And today we are talking airmail, a much different version of the way we ship mail through the air today, but one that played a really pivotal role in the development of commercial aviation. Mary, do you know anything about this?
So per usual, we are going to have story time with Brielle, and she's going to educate me on it. The only thing I know about airmail is like sometimes the post office puts things on an airplane, and it goes across the country that way. And then obviously cargo shipping. But yeah, I don't know much. And the approximately 30 seconds of Googling that I did when you told me that we were going to talk about airmail, I looked at some pictures because, pictures tell a story. And I am honestly very curious about what this is because some of the pictures I saw are truly and insanely wild and cannot be real.
Yeah, I was really interested in this topic because it's like one of those wild, things of the past. Like I wrote an article about like this pneumatic tube system that went through New York, and that's how the mail was delivered in the city back then for like a very short period of time. And this is very similar to that. It's just like a short, well, actually not, it was a couple decades, but a very strange way compared to today. Way of delivering the mail. But yeah, like I said, it was really important in the development of commercial aviation. And because it's so weird and obscured, I really hadn't heard of this either until I took a deep dive. Like I love going through I get a lot of my story ideas by going through like archives of like companies and the Postal Service. And I found this in the Postal Service archives, which is where we got all our information for today.
I have a question though. Do you think that the guys that delivered via airmail back in the day, do you think that they still got barked at by dogs like our mailmen do today?
I mean, I live by a base and my dogs bark at the planes a lot. So
it's probably likely because like if my dogs hear the mail truck, they will immediately start barking because even though the postman never leaves the truck, it still is an intruder. So I'm curious as to what dogs of like yesteryear did to the nice
my
airmail
dogs
man.
literally bark at anything possible.
Yeah.
Any possible movement outside of my house, my dogs are barking at. So yeah. I'm sure they would have terrorized these poor guys back then. And, they'll probably end up terrorizing us throughout this podcast. At some point that we'll have to edit out. But all right. We are going to start by going back to 1918, a time when airplanes were still a novel invention, and the idea of delivering mail by air seemed like a daring dream. And pilots of that era flew in open cockpits, so they braved all kinds of weather conditions in planes that were described as, and I quote, a nervous collection of whistling wires of linen stretched over wooden ribs, all attached to a wheezy, water-cooled engine.
I mean, when I'm thinking about something that's going to keep me up in the air, I love that it resembles something of an asthmatic. 10 out of 10.
And just the thought of piloting a plane yourself in 1918, is just wonderful.
Sold. Idea. Sign me up. Because I also probably won't have a helmet either. So, right. let's just get in it and see what happens.
So as, we've made clear, the risks were pretty high and pilots had to navigate using landmarks on the ground. So, not in the navigational systems that we have today. So they're looking for, that clock tower, that house, that building, and then you make a right. Like it's like driving directions, but in the air, in an airplane with an open cockpit. So in fog, they flew blind in unpredictable weather. Unreliable equipment and inexperience often led to frequent crashes. And tragically, 34 air mail pilots lost their lives between 1918 and 1927.
That's a long period of time. It's almost 10 years. And that's like, It's not great that that many people died, but I'm honestly surprised that it's not a little bit higher.
Just because of how ridiculous this
Yeah.
whole like dangerous thing this all is. I mean, I think of like even truck driving to be almost like a dangerous job because like, accidents happen and they're really common and we appreciate our truck drivers, but boy, was this even more risky and, just to deliver the mail. But through trial and error and personal sacrifice, U.S. Air Mail Service employees really developed reliable navigation aids and safety features for planes and pilots. They demonstrated that flight schedules could be safely maintained in all kinds of weather and even ventured into the realm of night flying, proving that it was possible. And
Night
once,
flying? Like,
yep,
no. Okay. All right. Cool. Carry on.
once the post office department had proven the viability of commercial flight, airmail service was turned over to private carriers flying under contract with the department. So in those early days before passenger service revenue, so keep in mind this is back before you're flying for, as a passenger. This is, only utility. So revenue from airmail contracts, they sustained commercial airlines. And the journey of airmail began even earlier than most people would think. In 1910, Representative Morris Shepherd of Texas introduced a bill to investigate the feasibility of an airplane or airship mail route. So they started investigating this idea back in 1910. And unfortunately, the bill didn't make it past the committee, and many considered it to be a fanciful dream, outrageous. But Postmaster General Frank Hitchcock, who served from 1909 to 1913, was one of the early advocates of using airplanes for mail transportation. In November 1910, at an aviation meet in Baltimore, thousands of spectators cheered as Hitchcock flew as a passenger in a monoplane. Fast forward to September 1911, when Hitchcock authorized the first official U.S. mail flights during an aviation meet in Long Island, New York. 8 pilots were sworn in as airplane mail carriers, and aviator Earl Ovington had the honor of piloting the first historic flight. They dropped mail bags from the plane to the ground where they were picked up by local postmasters. And these experimental flights paved the way for the department to urge Congress to appropriate money to launch air mail service. And then in 1916, Congress finally authorized $50,000 for airmail experiments. The department advertised for bids, but they received no acceptable responses. Then in 1917, Congress allocated $100,000 to establish experimental air service for the next fiscal year. And the post office advertised for bids for airplanes in February 1918, but shortly after, they decided to collaborate with the Army Signal Corps to operate the airmail service.
What I want to know is, what do those airmail experiments look like?
Right.
Like, they want these experiments, but like obviously, now we have the planes and the materials and everything that we have now. But what were those early experiments? What were they like?
I think I have some photos of them that I'll probably share on Twitter or on FreightWaves Classics, or maybe we can show them here. But yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. So it was a significant milestone when they scheduled the airmail service between New York and Washington, D.C. on May 15th, 1918. This marked an important moment in the history of commercial aviation. Simultaneous takeoffs were made from Washington's Polo Grounds and Belmont Park in Long Island via Philadelphia. These early plane mails had no reliable instruments or radios. Pilots relied on landmarks, like I said before, and dead reckoning for navigation. Forced landings due to bad weather were common, but thanks to the small size and maneuverability of the planes, fatalities were relatively rare except for those 34. So it wasn't as bad as it could have been, is essentially what we're saying. And the evolution of airmail rates also played a crucial role in its success. Initially set at 24 cents per ounce, including special delivery. The rate was later lowered to 16 cents and then 6 cents without special delivery. The public was initially hesitant to use this more expensive service as it was only a few hours quicker than regular mail service by train. In fact, airmail bags often contained as much as regular mail as airmail. So to enhance delivery times and encourage the public to use airmail, the department planned a transcontinental air route from New York to San Francisco. The first leg of the route was opened in 1919, connecting New York to Cleveland and Chicago with several stops along the way. Then by 1920, the last transcontinental segment was completed, connecting Omaha to San Francisco via various cities. And although the mail was carried on trains at night and flown by day initially, the service was still 22 hours faster than an all-rail alternative. So that's pretty cool. They were making strides finally.
Hey, a whole day is a big improvement. A big,
I would
big
say
improvement.
In 1920, yeah.
That's like internet speeds now.
So in August 1920, the department began installing radio stations at each airfield to provide pilots with current weather information. And by November, 10 stations were operating, including 2 Navy stations. The radios were also used by other government departments for special messages, weather forecasts, and stock market reports. And night flying became another major advancement in airmail service to demonstrate its feasibility. The department organized a through flight from San Francisco to New York on February 22nd, 1921. This historic flight marked the first time that mail was flown both day and night over the entire distance, despite challenging winter weather. So it was probably not smart to do it in that time of year.
I cannot imagine the difficulties, because it's not like you're in an insulated plane. Like when we fly in the middle of December, we like we're in a little temperature controlled cabin. That's not really the case back in the day with the asthmatic plane instructions and the sheets holding you in. Like I know they can't fly very high, but still that had to be so cold that I don't even want to try and be that guy going by night, being like, was that the right light? No. Or was that the right light?
The open air cockpit and, the having to navigate by sight. It's just like so hard to comprehend for me. I can barely drive, The success of this flight impressed Congress, leading to increased funding and expansion of airmail service. To prepare for night flying, the department equipped its planes with luminescent instruments, navigational lights, and parachute flares. So in 1923, the department began building a lighted airway along the transcontinental route to guide pilots at night. So a little safer than just kind of winging it. The first section that was completed was from Chicago to Cheyenne, spanning 885 miles. Emergency landing fields were created every 25 miles, marked by towering beacons, flashing gas beacons, etc. And they not only guided airmail pilots, but they also helped for other aviators flying through the route. The development of these lighted airways and the establishment of emergency landing fields really improved the safety and reliability of the airmail service. Pilots were now able to easily navigate at night, and it was really it kind of all came out because of a true testament to determination and innovation for those involved. They really wanted this to work. And the dedication to this progress did not go unnoticed. In 1922 and 1923, the department received the Collier Trophy for significant contributions to the development of aeronautics, particularly in the realm of safety and the feasibility of night flights. And this expansion, the expansion of the lighted airway continued, reaching Cleveland to the east and Rock Springs, Wyoming to the west in 1924. By 1925, it stretched from New York to Salt Lake City, and this allowed for regular cross-country through service, including night flying, like I said, which began on July 1st, 1924. And in 1926, the transcontinental trip from New York to San Francisco involved 15 stops for service and the exchange of mail. The journey included stops at cities like Cleveland, Chicago, Omaha, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, and Reno. And these early routes were a far cry from today's direct flights, and they required several aircraft changes en route. So Charles Stanton, an early airmail pilot and airmail division superintendent, reflected on those early days in his writings and remarked that we planted four seeds: airways, communications, navigation aids, and multi-engined aircraft. And while not all these concepts were fully realized at the time, they really truly laid the foundation for the modern aviation industry today. So all of this stuff that that they're doing to help deliver the mail faster and provide these new innovative ways for mail delivery actually kind of changed more of the aviation industry than anything. So this really, really laid the foundation for the modern air industry that we have today.
Well, because I know that even now they have like the like when you were talking about the like the light beacons and everything
Right.
on the aircraft, it reminds me of, sitting out in my backyard and seeing the airplanes, and then also the sticks and the lighted fields and the lighted runways that we have now. It's and the place to land every so many feet for an emergency. It really is something that we still use today. But one of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about switching aircrafts, could you imagine what happens if you lost a piece of mail? It's not just like, oh, it's lost at like a warehouse somewhere. That is like, it could be like in a farmer's field in Kansas.
I'm
Exactly.
just imagining like mail floating through the sky, like you're just walking your dog and you're like, got some personal letter here.
You're just
Way
getting
different.
attacked like Harry Potter.
Like, yeah, right. My neighbors always get my mail all the time, but I can't imagine like just walking through and like finding random mail flying in the air.
It's the magic mail tree.
Yeah. But now we've reached a turning point. So on February 2nd, my brother's birthday and Groundhog's Day, 1925, Congress authorized the Postmaster General to contract for air mail service. And the Post Office Department immediately invited bids from the commercial aviation companies. And the first commercial airmail flight in the U.S. took place on February 15th, 1926. And by the end of 1926, 11 out of 12 contracted airmail routes were operational. And as commercial airlines took over the airmail service, the department transferred its lights, its airways, its radio service, all to the Department of Commerce. Terminal airports, and the exception of government properties, with the exception of government properties in Chicago, Omaha, and San Francisco, they were handed over to the municipalities in which they were located. And so this transition represented the ongoing commercialization of aviation and marked the beginning of a new era in airmail. So this is really where modern aviation is taking off. And that's when it kind of changed to the modern system that we know today. But that marked the end of kind of the weirdness. There's a lot other, there's a whole new generation after this that I think I'm going to cover in a classics article coming up. But that marks the end of the beginning of airmail in the U.S.
I absolutely love that. I did not know that it was that it went back that far. I mean, it sounds like it's set up quite pretty much the entire air industry as we know today.
I know, it's absolutely crazy. Just that the way, like I said, the way mail is handled is completely different now. But back then, the aviation industry really got its start by just delivering sacks of mail and open air cargo.
I mean, it got to start somewhere. You got to walk before you can crawl, or crawl before you can walk.
That's true. Do you have any fun facts for us today, Mary?
Brielle, I have fun facts. And fun fact, the first aerial flight of mail that had some mail on it was technically in the United States. I'm just going to put a big technicality on this because it was like a one-off shoot. It was the definition of let's just see what happens. And this man Pierre Blanchard got in a hot air balloon on January 9th of 1793, which I didn't even know air balloons were like around then.
Right.
But he hopped in a little air balloon from Philadelphia and carried a personal letter from George Washington to be delivered to the owner of whatever property he happened to land on.
Oh my
So
God.
just to see, just to see.
Can
So
you
that
imagine?
was technically the first like recorded air mail that happened.
Right.
Just basically get in the air and fly.
Get in the air and fly.
But also, could you imagine like if you're sitting there in like 1793 and this balloon just comes over your property and also the guy in the balloon, how you got to be like, this is from the president. Here you
That was the
go.
first thing I thought of, just sitting here and being like, hi.
Like, I'm not an intruder. I'm just someone delivering something for George Washington.
I think back
And
then I would be like, the aliens are attacking.
exactly. But also then, how do you deal with like, okay, you get there. How do you get back? Like, because obviously you
Right.
had to land your hot air balloon for some reason. So, yeah, so that was that. And then there's also another balloon situation that happened in 1859 that was from Lafayette, Indiana to New York. But the guy didn't make it out of Indiana because of weather issues. So, but as a result, that's why there's so many hot air balloons on stamps, and basically all of the early inventions and the early like let's just see what happens is part of like the collector series and a lot of the inspiration for some of the stamps that we see on our postage today, or at least we've seen over the years.
I think we need to do a deep dive into hot air balloon delivery soon.
I think we need to do one on postage stamps.
Maybe.
Maybe I'll teach you about postage stamps.
I think you should, because I mean, I get those I get press releases all the time. I'm like, oh, news from the U.S. Postal Service. Oh wait, it's just a new stamp. But I will just close out today with just like a little summary of how it ended. So the main reason why this was different, because you could like order airmail, like it was a first class postage, version. But it fully came to an end in 1977, and that's when we transitioned to completely modern practices. So basically, the Postal Service announced that the first class postage, which was 3 cents cheaper, would buy the same or better level of service. And by then, the transportation patterns had changed, and most first class letters were already zipping across country through like airplanes, and airmail as a separate class of international mail ended on May 14th in 2007, actually. So when rates for the international transportation of mail by surface methods were eliminated. So, and that's all we have for today.
Well,
Is
I
that
appreciate it.
All right.
Well, I mean, I can go on forever for fun facts, but I don't think anyone really wants to listen to like 3 hours of me rambling about
I know. I'm
airmail
sorry
fun
I cut you
facts.
short because I noticed the time and I wanted to just get that last
It's all
piece
right.
of
I
info in there.
appreciate it. But yeah, I am happy to learn, and definitely check out some of the pictures for this one because it's insane.
Yeah,
Absolutely insane.
absolutely. All right. Well, that marks the end of today's episode. Thank you guys for tuning in. And you can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Riel to see what else we have going on at FreightWaves Classics. And you can email me at bjakel@freightwaves.com. Also, Mary, why don't you give out your Twitter? Give Mary a follow.
If you want to
too.
follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at MaryO_119. You can also subscribe to my newsletters on FreightWaves.com/subscribe or /tread call or running on ice. You name it, you're going to find me on it.
All right. And tune in 2 weeks for our next episode on FreightWaves TV, or listen to the show wherever you get your podcasts.